everyone, today we're going to debate about our research regarding the roles of the interpreter. This debate will present arguments for and against the role of interpreters as cultural mediators. Our team consists of Marcela and Alejandra, who agree with this statement, and Luis and Elisa, who disagree with it. And I'm Stephanie, the mediator. Our first question is the role of the interpreter to be a cultural mediator or only a translator of words? Let's analyze the cultural responsibility that interpreters have in international or multicultural settings.
Hello, everyone. Today we support the idea that language is more than vocabulary. It carries culture, meaning, norms, and context. Simply replacing words from one language to another is not enough to ensure accurate communication, especially in contexts like legal, medical, or international.
We are in opposition and we agree with the idea that the primary role of the interpreter is to copy the message faithfully and accurately. That means that an interpreter is a linguistic bridge, but not a cultural mediator.
Well, I strongly disagree with that because the interpreter is a mediator not only of languages, but also of cultures, because in practice it is impossible to separate the language from its cultural environment.
I see where you come from, but as my partner said, the interpreter's primary duty is to convey the message exactly as it was expressed. Acting as a cultural mediator may lead to modifying or reinterpreting the original message, which can alter the speaker's intent.
Yes, I understand what you're saying, but even the International Medical Interpreters Association recognizes the role of cultural broker, demonstrating the importance of the interpreter's cultural knowledge.
Yeah, even though the cultural knowledge is depending on each interpreter, the cultural responsibility belongs just to the parties involved or to designated cultural advisors. Expanding the interpreter's role increases ethical and professional burdens unnecessarily.
I do understand Lucy's point, but I think it's important to mention that mediation is done ethically and also carefully, and only when necessary to prevent miscommunication. Again, especially in contexts like medicine or law, which are so important. And the interpreter's goal is understanding, not influencing decisions.
Yeah, and it's also a good idea to mention that according to organizations such as the International Association of Conference of Interpreters, interpreters must remain faithfully to the speaker's message, maintain impartially, avoid adding, omitting, or altering information. So for sure, it involves to understand what they are hearing and communicate it in the same way. But here the goal is to ensure that the parties hear exactly what was said, not what the interpreter believes should have been said.
Yes, but having cultural knowledge of both parties helps to avoid mistakes and prevent injustices and increase the trust between both parties. And it is also a sign of respect and preparation from the interpreter.
Yes, and adding a little bit more about what Marcy said, multiple studies in healthcare and legal interpretation can confirm that interpreters naturally mediate culture while still remaining impartial. So, cultural understanding does not violate neutrality, it actually supports it. For example, um, if a doctor instructs the patient using idioms or phrases that the patient does not understand due to cultural differences, an interpreter who explains the meaning is still faithful to the speaker's intent while ensuring the patient comprehends the message.
Yeah, but the thing is that here in cultural mediation involves personal judgment, even we like it or not, which may introduce the interpreter's own ideological, religious, or political biases into the communication. And blurring these boundaries may create confusion, especially in legal or diplomatic settings, in which the interpreter must function just as a neutral linguistic channel, not as an active participant in the interaction.
But when we say that interpreters are cultural mediators, that doesn't mean that the interpreter will share their opinions. That just means that the interpreter have knowledge of both cultures and will use that knowledge to help both parties understand each other and as accurately as possible.
Interpreters play a role that goes beyond simply translating words. In multicultural and international settings, they must also be aware of cultural differences that can affect communication, while maintaining neutrality and accuracy. Interpreters often need to provide cultural context to ensure that the intended meaning is clearly understood. Therefore, the interpreter's responsibility lies in balancing faithful translation with cultural awareness to facilitate effective and respectful communication between people from different cultural backgrounds. Now, let's move on to our second question, that is, should interpreters get involved in resolving ethical conflicts during their work or limit themselves to interpreting? Let's explore the limits of neutrality and the ethical role of interpreters in legal, medical, and political contexts.
We agree with the idea that interpreters are not legal, medical, or moral authorities, and resolving ethical conflicts is the responsibility of judges, doctors, and lawyers, or personnel qualified. The interpreter's role is to facilitate communication, not to deliver justice.
Let's not forget that ethical intervention protects. It does not really replace professional authority. Interpreters do not replace judges, doctors, or diplomats. We agree that they simply ensure that the message is understood accurately.
Yes, but it is also important to remember that each profession has their own ethical codes, emphasis. Impartiality, confidentiality, and accuracy are examples for interpreter. So if interpreters attempt to resolve ethical conflicts, they could take sides, step out their professional role, and become participants rather than facilitators. So we can say that in legal and political settings, this can be particularly dangerous.
While it is true that each profession has its own ethical codes, the interpreter's role is unique. They are the bridge between parties, and sometimes that requires ethical judgment to ensure fairness and accuracy.
And it is also important to mention that a good professional works according to the rules, yes, but cannot ignore situations that require their intervention, even if that means going against the rules. For example, in cases where one party is in a position of greater power than the other one, it is important to remain impartial, obviously, but at the same time to not allow any type of abuse.
Yeah, as you said, we have rules and obviously clear boundaries that protect the integrity of the interpreting profession. Expanding the role into ethical decision making blurs professional limits and may weaken standards of practice. If an interpreter intervenes in ethical matters and the outcome is negative, they could face legal or professional consequences for acting beyond their defined role. Interpreters must give both parties equal linguistic access. Taking initiative in ethical disputes may unintentionally favor one side.
But ignoring situations where a party is in danger can also lead to professional consequences. For example, if an interpreter notices a patient is confused about medication and does nothing about it, the patient could be harmed in different ways. So the interpreter could then be held accountable for failing to ensure comprehension, even if no intervention was intended. Um, so this means that ethical action can prevent harm and legal repercussions.
Yeah, the thing is that sometimes when interpreter attempts to clarify, simplify, or influence an ethical issue, for example, again, in a risky surgery, they may unintentionally affect the patient's decision, compromising valid informed consent, which can also affect.
Yeah, in legal and medical context, intervention can compromise the process. So in judicial system, interpreters cannot provide legal advice, cannot clarify beyond what was stated, or influence decisions. So if they beyond the interpretation, then the process may be invalidated and the right to fair trial may be compromised. As we already said, the doctor is responsible for medical ethics, the lawyer is responsible for legal ethics, and for sure the politician is responsible for their discourse.
Yes, well, at least in the medical field, even the International Medical Interpreters Association recognizes the role of advocate, demonstrating that in the work of an interpreter, there will always be situations when the interpreter ethics are compromised and a decision must be made. And by that, we do not mean that the interpreter is responsible for the action of one party of both parties, but rather for what he or she does or does not do.
See a real tension in legal settings. The interpreter's neutrality is vital, but in a medical or political environment, if they don't provide cultural context, patient care or policy discussions can suffer. So, the ethical line for interpreters is constantly shifting depending on the stakes. I think that's a crucial point for both sides of the debate. In conclusion, interpreters must balance neutrality with cultural awareness in order to communicate meaning accurately between different cultures. Thank you for listening.